There comes a point when you look around at your life, the questions, the detours, the silence, and wonder, God, is there really a plan in all this? It's not doubt that drives the question. It's longing for direction, for clarity, for confidence that you're not just wandering, but walking somewhere meaningful. The truth is, you were never created to figure it all out alone. You were created to walk with someone who already has. God's plan for your life isn't fragile. It's not ruined by delay or detour. It's not a puzzle you have to solve. It's a path you're invited to follow, step by step, day by day, sometimes with light, sometimes only with trust. The Psalms say, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path," not a floodlight that shows the whole road, just enough for the next step. And that's where hearing his voice begins, not in shouting, but in stillness. God doesn't compete with chaos. He speaks in quiet places, in surrendered moments, in the pause between decisions. The question is never whether God is speaking. It's whether we're still enough to hear. Sometimes his voice sounds like conviction. Sometimes it sounds like peace. Sometimes it's found in Scripture, sometimes in silence. But always, it leads toward life, toward alignment, toward becoming more like him. You don't have to chase purpose, you have to chase presence, and purpose will follow. The reason God's plan often feels unclear isn't because he's hiding it. It's because he's more interested in who you're becoming than where you're going. We crave answers. He cultivates trust. We want blueprints. He gives us presence. Because if you knew every detail in advance, you'd rely on the plan, not the one who wrote it. Following God's path isn't about having all the information. It's about learning his character. The more you know his heart, the more you'll recognize his direction. Like a sheep knows the shepherd's voice, you begin to discern which thoughts are yours and which ones are from him. His voice won't sound like fear, shame, or pressure. It will sound like peace, clarity, and stillness. Even when it's hard. Sometimes the plan doesn't look holy. Sometimes it looks like waiting, like obscurity, like doing the faithful, quiet thing that no one applauds. But make no mistake, that is still the path. And obedience in small places often leads to breakthrough in big ones. We often think of God's will as a distant destination, something we'll reach one day if we just make all the right choices. But maybe it's closer than that. Maybe God's will is the step right in front of you, the moment where you choose to listen instead of worry, trust instead of control, surrender instead of strive. You don't have to see the full picture to move in the right direction. God rarely gives the destination first. He gives the invitation. Follow me. That was always the call. Not understand everything, not map it all out, but simply follow. And that kind of following requires faith that God's presence is better than your plan. Many people wait to feel ready before they act, before they obey. But God's path isn't walked by the ready. It's walked by the willing. The truth is, readiness comes in motion. Peace often comes after the step, not before it. You won't always feel certain, but you can be surrendered. And that's what he's looking for. The more you walk with God, the more you start to recognize his patterns. He opens and closes doors not to confuse you, but to protect you. He delays not to punish you, but to prepare you. What feels like a detour is often direction in disguise. The road may curve, but it still leads to him. And remember, his timing is part of his plan. Just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it's not happening. Delayed does not mean denied. Your role isn't to predict what's next. It's to trust who's leading. That's how you follow his path, not with perfect clarity, but with consistent surrender. If this stirred something in you, subscribe and turn on the bell, not just to follow a channel, but to walk a journey of faith, one truth at a time. Sometimes God's plan won't look like progress. It will look like pause, like delay, like unanswered prayers. But don't be fooled. Silence doesn't mean stillness. Just because you can't see movement doesn't mean He's not working. The seed grows underground before it ever breaks the surface. And so does faith. God is just as intentional in the waiting as He is in the sending. In fact, some of the most defining moments in your walk with Him will come in the spaces between what was promised and what appears. That's where trust is built. That's where dependence is formed. That's where the plan becomes personal. You see, God's path is not a straight line. It's a process. And He's more interested in transforming you than transporting you. The path is not just taking you somewhere, it's making you someone. And sometimes, what looks like a delay is actually grace in disguise, protecting you from something you didn't even know to avoid. In those quiet stretches of your journey, when things feel unclear and prayers seem to echo back without reply, remember this: God's silence is never absence. He's the God who sees in secret, who shapes in hidden places, who prepares you quietly before presenting you publicly, and when the time is right, the next step will appear. It always does. And then there comes a moment, quiet, subtle, when God whispers the next step. Not a full plan, not a 5-year vision, just the next thing. And that's where obedience becomes real. Because obedience is rarely dramatic. It's usually quiet, private. It happens in decisions no one sees, in prayers no one hears, in steps no one applauds. Hearing God's voice isn't about being super spiritual. It's about being available, open, willing. It's when you stop rushing, start listening and say, "Speak, Lord, I'm listening." And in that posture, His direction often comes not as a shout, but as a still, small clarity, a nudge, a conviction, a scripture that won't leave you alone. When you follow God's path, you learn that peace isn't always found in the answer. It's found in alignment. When your heart aligns with His will, peace follows, even if the road ahead is uncertain. That's how you know it's Him. The path might be narrow, but your spirit feels steady. And don't underestimate the step you're in now. Just because it looks small doesn't mean it's insignificant. Every great move of God started with someone saying yes in private. Before David faced Goliath, he was faithful in fields. Before Esther stood before a king, she lived in silence. Faithfulness in the hidden places always prepares you for purpose in public ones. God's plan doesn't need to make sense to be sacred. It just needs to be followed. And the beauty is, He's not rushing you to figure it all out. He's inviting you to walk with Him in real time. One moment, one whisper, one act of trust at a time. You don't need to leap forward. Just stay close. He'll do the leading. We often imagine that walking in God's will means constantly knowing where we're going. But what if it's less about arrival and more about abiding? His greatest promise was never a roadmap. It was Himself. I will be with you. That presence turns every step, even the confusing ones, into holy ground. Sometimes you'll hear clearly. Other times, you'll just feel peace when you move in a certain direction. That peace is not an accident. It's a signal. It's God saying, keep going. And when you're off track, He knows how to redirect. He doesn't punish missteps taken in faith. He gently realigns. Because His goal isn't your perfection, it's your closeness. The more you respond to His voice, the more clearly you hear it. Obedience sharpens discernment. Every act of trust becomes a conversation. Every surrender becomes a signpost. Before you realize it, you're no longer just following a plan. You're following a person. And in doing so, you become the person you were always meant to be. The destination you're chasing may change. The timeline you imagined might fall apart. But the God who called you, He never does. His voice remains steady when the path doesn't. His love remains faithful when your steps feel uncertain. That's why the goal has never been a perfect journey. It's been a present relationship. God's plan isn't something you unlock once. It's something you keep unfolding with Him, layer by layer, through disappointment, through detours, through doors you never thought would open, and some you prayed wouldn't close. It's all part of the same masterpiece, not because every moment is good, but because He is. Even the delays have meaning. Even the waiting has weight. The places where you feel stuck, He's still writing. The quiet seasons, He's still speaking. The path that feels foggy, He's still guiding. What you see as wandering might just be the way, and what feels like silence might just be Him saying, "Trust me." So no, you don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to stay close. Let His voice be louder than your fear. Let His presence be deeper than your need for control. Let every step, even the trembling ones, be another way of saying, "Yes, Lord, I'll follow." And now ask yourself this: what if the uncertainty you're trying to escape is the exact space where God is trying to teach you how to hear Him more clearly?